So today I'm going to be taking a look at one of the newest releases from Visitor. I've reviewed their pieces in the past, and they're just a pretty unique micro brand. For full transparency, I was actually sent this watch from Visitor. No payment, no kind of direction for what the review needs to say or what it doesn't need to say. It's completely all my opinions, but I was lent this watch to review. So let's get into it. So we have a diameter of about 44 millimeters, lug to lug of a quite substantial 51, height somewhere around 14, and a lug width of 22 millimeters. Some other general specifications for this watch: we're going to have the Miyota 9039 beating away in here. We also have 200 meters of stated water resistance with a nice screw down crown. We have a sapphire crystal on the front with an inner AR coating, and I think that's mainly everything. I believe Super Luminova used for the Lume, and we have a nice 120 click bezel. Last but not least, the watch retails for $750 direct from Visitor on a strap, either rubber or textile, and then it is an extra $100 for this kind of beads of rice 10-11 link style bracelet. So moving on to the dial here, and being a Visitor watch, it is quite unique, but it is undoubtedly having the same Visitor design language. It has the same kind of dial design as all the other watches do, but slightly different handset and whatnot. So looking a little closer, we have the kind of regular circular pips at the 12, 3, 6, and 9. We have what are quoted as the ink drop hour markers at all the other hour markers. Towards the periphery here, we have the counter sunken seconds track, which is, sandwiched in Lume under the dial there. And then we have this nice also sunken in crosshair section in the middle. A very prominent minute hand here. I believe it's meant to represent kind of a full fountain pen. I'm not 100% sure. I'll correct it somewhere down below. And then we have the hour hand here, which is meant to represent the tip of a fountain pen. Overall, very clean design, really not much text at all. If I move the huge minute hand away, you can see the only real branding is that it says Visitor. Nothing crazy. What I do like is that all the Lume applied does have a nice dimensionality to it. It does pop up off the dial, and because you have the kind of sandwiched Lume around the periphery and the middle sunken in section here, you do have a nice depth to the dial that otherwise wouldn't be there for just a plain, flat, relatively boring dial. But everything done here is really nice, and everything you see in green is lumed, which is nice. And then lastly, just the dial color. We have this nice dark shade of green, which has this kind of nice glossy appearance. Overall, really nice. Green's one of my favorite colors, but I'm not a big fan of green Lume, as most of you, if you've ever seen another one of my videos, know. So although I think on the green dial it does work well with all the separate green tones, I would have still preferred white Lume. So zooming in on the dial here, and just to note, this is a pre-production piece, and it's not focusing the best here. But as you can see, there is a little bit of roughness around the edge of that hour marker there, a little bit of roughness around the edges of the hands, a little bit of speckling here and there. But overall, the dial is really well done. Again, there's this nice kind of lacquered appearance to the dial itself. Here you can really see how sunken in that minute track is there, and nice and loomed up. All the Lume infill itself is really nice, really finely packed in there. No real kind of pieces missing or anything like that. So it is done pretty well, and I like the fact that you have these metal surrounds to the Lume, but the Lume itself does rise up above the actual metal surrounds, so it gives that little extra depth that I think is sorely needed in a lot of watches. Just looking quickly at the hour hands here, really nicely shaped. Again, these are very much custom. They're not off the shelf. They are designed and made specifically for this brand, for this watch, and it's really cool. I think it's really well executed. The design language is unique. It's its own, and I think it is in harmony with itself, which I think is a hard thing to kind of do sometimes. So overall, well executed. There aren't even a lot of blemishes here, even though this is a pre-production model. So moving on to the case of this watch, and I think this is one of the most interesting points about the watch itself. So we have this very angular, very aggressive, very just big case. It has plenty of angles. We have a main kind of angle here, this nice angle along the bottom, which is nice and curved and angled. It's an aggressive case, and it's aggressively styled, but it is unique. It is really like a sculpted car or spaceship or just something crazy. And it's interesting because the actual kind of bezel slash mid case looks like it just sits within a kind of shroud of the rest of the case, which is a very interesting detail. And I think it's kind of meant to draw attention to that point, mainly because the rest of the surround case is all brushed in this kind of whatever grain matches the direction of that side, but the actual kind of mid-case tube, as it were, is highly polished to draw kind of some attention to that detail. Overall, the watch is fairly thick, but as you can see, there's a huge curve to the case back itself, so it does wear nicely on wrist. It wears comfortably. There is a nice kind of just design to the case itself, so although it is large, it is bulky, it doesn't wear badly at all. We do have drilled lugs here, which is really nice to see. And all these angles and curves and just shape, custom made, really interesting. It looks like nothing else on the market, which I think is not only hard to do, but hard to do well. For the bezel, it is also in a brushed steel with the 5 to 20 spelled out and little lume pips in between. And then we have at the 6, 9, and 12 these kind of more defined ink plots. The 12 o'clock marker also is raised above the dial, raised above the bezel slightly more than the other ones are. So there is a kind of tactile feel to that 12 o'clock marker, which I guess is just a nice little detail. Looking at the case back, we have this very, very cool sea lion logo situation happening. Very simply, visitor watch code there, and then this model name up there. I think it's really well executed. It's very deeply done, and it is curved, which is just really interesting. It shows that not only was the design paid a lot of attention to, but the ergonomics of this very large case were also a huge factor in just the design aspects. Looking at the bracelet here, and I think this is a really interesting point too, because this isn't any regular beads of rice or whatever link bracelet. The actual beads of this bracelet are shaped in the shape of the lume plots, or not the lume plots, but the ink drop hour markers, which is an amazing detail, something that definitely didn't have to be done, but shows that Visitor just kind of went to every length to try to make it as unique and kind of custom as possible. Looking at the clasp, we kind of have the standard deployant or double push button deployant, but a custom huge buckle, which is not only as angular as the case itself, but has this kind of nice Visitor medallion that nicely kind of nestles into there. So really nice attention to detail. There is kind of a little play with the bracelet itself. I don't know if that's because it's a pre-production bracelet or that's just kind of consequence of the design, but it's never opened on me accidentally, and it is still very comfortable on the wrist. One thing I want to note is how well the kind of push button deployant is hided, or not hided, is hid from the overall design. It looks just like one solid mass of just buckle, which I think is really nice, just kind of shows how attention to detail was paid to this design. And then another fun aspect of the bracelet is if we look on here on either side, if I can get that to focus, on either side we have these kind of tiny little what look like quick release spring bars, and they actually have two separate holes within the bracelet to allow micro adjust. And this is an amazing inclusion, because not only do you have it on both sides, not only is it fairly intuitive to use, but it's very rare you see any type of micro adjust on a butterfly clasp deployant bracelet. And that's one of my kind of biggest pet peeves about a butterfly deployant, because no matter how small the links are, sometimes you won't get a bracelet that fits your wrist well. And this kind of little bit of micro adjust allows you to get a better fit than you normally would. So moving on to how the watch wears, I was wearing my Tudor Pelagos to give you an idea of how it wears in comparison to a more traditional large watch. And there we have the Visitor on my 6.5-inch wrist. And this is undoubtedly at the kind of upper limits of what looks good on my wrist. It is definitely, there's no qualms about it, it is a large watch. It has a large visual presence, it has a lot of heft, and it's very angular and aggressive, and it just looks large and looks big. But it is fairly constrained, it is curved very well, it sits amazingly flat on the wrist thanks to that curved case back and just kind of the case ergonomics and designs and angles. And I don't think it looks badly at all, or it looks bad at all. I do wish they made this in like a 40 millimeter because if you shrunk this down even more so, it would be an amazing mid-size kind of feeling diver, or even a 38 would be awesome. But even as it stands, I do think it wears very well on people with larger wrists than mine, anything above really a 7-inch wrist. This will look pretty good on you, I would say. So the watch wears well, it wears comfortably. Even though it is larger, I don't think it looks out of place on my wrist. It just looks large. And then looking at the case side, although there isn't a traditional kind of mid-case curvature, because there is a curvature to the case back, it does end up sitting very flat and very comfortably on wrist. I would say for shorter wrists, because there's no kind of curvature to either the lug ends or the actual mid-case, it does end up wearing a little flatter and maybe not as comfortably as it would on larger wrists. But again, it still is a pretty nice design and a pretty comfortable design for what it is. There is still flexion allowed in the wrist, even though there is a slight kind of digging from the crown. But overall, no complaints. It wears pretty well. It just, I do wish it was a little smaller, but it is what it is. And then one thing I forgot to mention was the bezel action. It is a very, very responsive, clicky, I guess you'd say purposeful bezel. There really isn't any backplay at all, like there is zero backplay, and it feels like it only clicks over with a good amount of force. You're not going to accidentally end up moving the bezel. It is very much purposeful. It does have a little bit of a tinny sound, but I don't think it's bad at all. It works well. I think it looks nice. It functions as it should, and it's pretty well executed. Here we have some other straps. This is a leather Nato from Benchamark straps. This nice kind of tan color works well with the green tones, and it's not the thickest of Natos, so I don't think it adds too much to the height. It doesn't look too bad at all. The tones work really well together. It isn't overly thick, so the watch still plants itself very well, and I dig it. Next we have this black Benchmark Silicone Nato. Very comfortable, looks great. Even thinner than the leather, so wears really well. And there we have it. Wears really flat, wears really comfortably, plants the watch on the wrist even nicer. So a pretty good strap overall, I think. And lastly, we have this cheapest Nato strap, Suede. I think it looks nice. The tones play really well with the dial and just kind of the vintagey feel. So let's get it on wrist. Not the most elegant look, but I think it still does work. Probably would work a little bit better on someone with a larger wrist. But the tones work well. I think the strap works well, and not too shabby. So looking at the Lume here, unfortunately I accidentally deleted the Lume footage and I no longer have the watch. So Phil, the owner, was luckily kind enough to send me a photo of the Lume, and I actually have a small photo that, a video that didn't get deleted that I'll drop in later. But looking at the Lume, as you can see, the hands and the markers kind of mismatch a little bit, the hands being the brightest part. I don't know if that's going to be true for the full production model, but at least this is what I see here. It's still a pretty good application of Lume. You can see the visitor logo itself is actually loomed. The actual bezel, each 12, 6, and 9 marker, and then the kind of 0 to 20 minutes on the bezel itself. It's a pretty good application of Lume. It lasts for a good amount of time, and it's pretty bright overall. And then moving pretty quickly into the tiny little footage that I got, as you can see, same thing, the hands are a little bit brighter, but it is a torch. It is very, very easy to read. So pros and cons of the Visitor, and one of the biggest pros for this watch and just kind of Visitor as a brand is that they have really unique case designs. This one in particular has this very kind of almost, if Panerai kept innovating kind of case shape. It has that pseudo cushion shape. It's very architecturally sculpted, and it has a lot of curves, a lot of just beauty in it, and it looks cool and fits well, especially for its size. I love all the just subtle design elements that are obviously not off the shelf. They are distinctly Visitor. All the influences of fountain pens and the inkiness of the dial and the actual kind of fountain pen plot beads of rice bracelet. Like, it's all kind of over-engineered to a point and over-designed to a point, but it still works. It still looks amazing, and it's just unique. Another pro for the watch is going to be the beads of rice bracelet. It is awesome that it takes inspiration from the dial itself. It fits well, it's awesome, it has those two little points of micro adjust, and it has an amazing clasp. Yes, it's not the most sturdy clasp ever, and I don't know if it was a pre-production bracelet or not, but even still, it never popped off, it still felt sturdy, and I can forgive it a little bit because it's still so cool. And lastly, I just really like the dial of the watch. It has a really unique, inky depth to the dial. It has a shiny appearance to it. It's not overly reflective, and I just enjoyed the look of it. I think both well, not both, but all three, the green, the kind of teal, and the orange, all have that same inky quality to them, and it just looks good in person. It feels very premium. Now moving on to cons, and really I don't have many for this watch. One small con you can kind of assume for the watch is the bracelet clasp is a little bit, it has that little bit of movement slash give in it. Not really a big deal for me because again, it still was very sturdy, but something to mention. A real con for me is just gonna be the size of the watch. It is just a little too big. For anyone over like a 7-inch wrist, it probably looks amazing. But for me, I would have much preferred it to be like a 40 millimeter, a 38 even would have been awesome. But even as it stands, it still wears well for its size, and it's kind of meant to be a larger watch, a larger stature of a watch. And my last real con for the watch is just gonna be the green lume on it. Again, this is just kind of a theme with me, a pet peeve of mine. Any use of C3 Superluminova, it just doesn't work well for me. It leaves that slight green tint to the lume whenever it's in kind of like direct light. It usually clashes with dial elements and dial colors and strap combinations. Luckily on this green dial in particular, the green tones work well with each other. They blend more than, let's say, the orange or the teal dial does. But even still, I think it would have looked even better had they just gone for something like a BGW9 lume signature. So final thoughts on this watch, and I think it's pretty awesome. It's undoubtedly a unique dive watch. It's undoubtedly just kind of one of a kind. It doesn't look like anything else on the market. It's not trying to, and it's refreshing to see that. This is a brand that all their pieces come in at under $1,000, and they're giving you, I think, so much value for money, so much, I guess, fresh air, a breath of fresh air for the money, right? Every time I have a visitor in, or every time I own a visitor, I just love wearing it because it just feels different from any other watch you've ever worn or have ever experienced or have ever looked at. And it's just nice. It's a nice feeling. Other than that, I think it's just pretty good value for money. Again, these cases are probably not cheap to make. Doing all these custom hands and dial elements and just making the watch itself is probably not cheap. So it's nice to see this isn't like a $2,000 watch or anything. Yes, the movement could be a little better. They can use a higher grade ETA or something like that, but it doesn't really matter to me. It's not really the movement that you're buying the watch for. At the end of the day, you're kind of buying this watch or even looking at this watch or even considering this watch because you want something different. You don't want the classic Seiko diver. You don't want the classic like Oris or step up to Tudor or even just some other microbrand offerings. You want something that's completely out of the box, completely different. And that's what Visitor is. It's different, but it's good. It's good different. Yeah, that's just kind of everything I have to say. I hope you enjoyed the review. I hope you enjoyed the review. If you get the watch, please let me know. It'd be interesting to hear some of your thoughts on it. Thank you for watching the video, and I'll see you in another one.